Israelites that are of the seed of Abraham physically. Yeah, physically. Okay. So, how do you interpret then? I guess Romans 11. Obviously, it talks about how the Jews are the natural branches that were cut off, and then the wild olive was grafted in, and how they're not of Israel. As a matter of fact, he even starts off with saying, "Now to you Gentiles, I say to you." Right. At first, he was speaking to.
So the brother's question here is, well, how do we interpret Romans 11, right? So I kind of want to just delve into that, give my personal answer to that real quick. This is Romans 11, and I'm going to start at verse 16, right?
And I'm going to give my personal response. But why do they always jump to verse 16? Why not just read it straight through and then go back and explain what you read like you learned in grade school? But forgot, he dropped out. Okay, he doesn't know how it works. You read the whole thing in proper context, in its proper context, then you come back and you highlight certain passages that stood out to you or are questionable or you believe are the turning point or whatever. You come back, but you don't start midway. All right. But he didn't finish grade school. He said that. I didn't. He said that. That's why he jumps to the mid chapter.
This is Romans 11 and 16, right? We got to highlight certain key aspects of this.
You're supposed to highlight after you read it's in its full context. You come back and highlight. You don't highlight without the proper context.
Chapter, because that's what makes Christians' ideology, breakdown, and understanding of Romans 11 totally unravel. There's key points here that are the fatal blows in Christian doctrine, right? Verse 16, for if the first fruit be holy, the lump is also holy. And if the root be holy, so are the branches. If we look at verse 1, Paul says something. He says, I say then, have God cast away his people? God forbid, for I also am an Israelite. So here, Paul is identifying Israel physically as God's people. To prove that further, he says, of the seed of Abraham, of the tribe of Benjamin, the physical bloodline descendants of Israel, of Abraham, of Isaac. He is identifying here as the people of God, as God's people, not figuratively, metaphorically, spiritually, or by adoption. He is redundantly emphasizing the physical Israelites are in fact the people of God, echoing the sentiments that he speaks about 2 chapters earlier, Romans 9, 1-6, which will come into play later on in this video. He says that, right? But he mentions somebody, Abraham. So let's go back with Abraham in mind and let's examine verse 16 with Abraham in mind. For if the first fruit be holy, the lump is also holy. And if the root be holy, so are the branches. So that chosen lineage that comes from Abraham is.
That didn't change the context, buddy. It's still talking about ethnic Gentiles being grafted in to the tree of Israel, the olive tree.
Holy by default because they come from that first fruit of Abraham. They come from that root of Abraham. So them being the chosen branches of Abraham are holy by default. That's what Paul is saying right there, right? We'll keep going. And if some of the branches be broken off, and thou being a wild olive tree.
And if some of the branches are, okay, it says, and if some of the branches be broken off, let's unpack that. These branches are being broken off of what tree? Okay. And you really have to understand who is Paul speaking to and who is Paul speaking about. All right. That really unravels this entire chapter. You need to know who is Paul speaking to and who is Paul speaking about. So that's why you got to read the context. Okay. And since he didn't do it, so allow me to do it. Okay. Because it really won't make much sense if we don't read it correctly. Okay. So Paul, this is no. We need Romans 11. I could have spent Paul for that. But okay, whatever. Okay, why I keep going? There we go. Now, no more mistakes. Romans 11, please. Thank you. Okay. Israel is not cast away. I say then, have God cast away his people? God forbid. For I am also an Israelite of the seed of Abraham, of the tribe of Benjamin. So, Grla, we don't need to insert Abraham. We're reading it. Okay. So now we have God has not cast away his people, which he foreknew. Won't you know what the scripture has said of Elias? How he maketh intercession to God against Israel, saying, The Lord, they have killed thy prophets and digged down thy altars, and I am left alone, and they seek my life. Verse 4, but what saith the answer of God unto him? I have reserved to myself 7,000 men who have not bowed the knee to the image of Baal. Verse 5, even so, then as this present time, also there is a remnant according to the election of grace. So Paul is saying, like the days of Elijah, today, present time, all of Israel hasn't, turned to idolatry, right? In all these wicked ways, there's a small remnant of Israel who worships the Most High to his satisfaction, to his satisfaction. Okay, so let's keep going. Verse 6, and if by grace, then it is no more works. Otherwise, grace is no more grace. But if it be of works, then it is no more grace. Otherwise, work is no more work. What then? Israel hath not obtained that which he seeketh for, but the election hath attained it, and the rest were blinded. Okay, so Israel have not obtained it. So this is everybody collectively, but only an election of this embodiment has obtained it. Okay, and the rest of this embodiment were blinded. So, like the example earlier of the small remnant of Elijah's time, there's a small election of Paul's time who have obtained satisfaction from the Most High. The rest were blinded. So the blinded ones will get a second chance. The election is already in. Okay. Romans 11:8. According as it was written, or it is written, God hath given them the spirit of slumber, eyes that they should not see, and ears that they should not hear until this day. Who is he giving them the spirit to? Who is the them? The them are the rest that were blinded. This is why they can't get it, and this is why they have not obtained it. Verse 9. And David said, let their tables be made a snare, and a trap, and a stumbling block, and a recompense unto them. Let their eyes be darkened, and that they may not see, and bow down their back always. So now we're getting to where really Hebrews at. I say then, have they stumbled that they should fall? God forbid, but rather through their fall, salvation is coming to the Gentiles for to provoke them to jealousy. Okay, so who is the they? Who is the there? Who is the there that's fallen, right? That salvation must come to the Gentiles. Who are these people? Who are the they? The they are the blinded, okay? That you read back here, okay? The rest, the embodiment of that Israel, all right? The rest are them. Okay, so through the blinded of Israel fall, salvation has come to the Gentiles because the blinded ones fell. Salvation is now offered to the Gentiles to provoke the blinded ones who fell to jealousy. All right, so blinded people have fallen off and they have provoked, and as a result, salvation has come to the Gentiles to provoke the blinded fallen ones to jealousy, to get back in, to fall back in line. Now, if the fall of them, of who? Who is the them? Of the blinded ones, right? Be the riches of the world, and the diminishing of them, the riches of the Gentiles. So the fall of the blinded ones has become the riches of the world and the riches of the Gentiles. How much more their fullness? So we're talking about the blinded ones, all right? For I speak to you, Gentiles. So he's speaking to an audience and he's calling his audience Gentiles. And these are not the blinded of Israel that fell off. And as much as I am the apostle of the Gentiles, I magnify my office. Okay. So we got who is Paul speaking about? He's speaking about the blinded of Israel, the blind of Israel, the blind of Israel. And he's speaking to the Gentiles who's in question, right? If by any means I may provoke to emulation them which are my flesh, and might save some of them, right? So remember, we're provoking the blinded ones by trying to save them. Slow down. For if the casting away of them, who is the them? The blinded of Israel, be the reconciling of the world, what shall the receiving of them be? But life from the dead. So we're talking about the blinded, the blind. You're blind, baby. You're blind from the facts. Okay, so those blind Israelites have a chance to come back, right? And the chance of coming back is hoping that they are provoked to jealousy by Gentiles coming in. For if the first fruit be holy, the lump is also holy. And if the root be holy, so are the branches. Okay, so now we get into this analogy of the branches and the trees. But up until this point, the context is about the election, which is a remnant who is, you could say, saved or chosen, or at least satisfactory in God's eyes. And then you have the rest of Israel, whoever that may be, but they are blind, they are blinded, and they are cut off. Okay, they have fallen, and their fall has provided opportunity for this class called Gentiles to now come in, right? Romans 11:17, and if some of the branches be broken off, and thou, so who is the thou? The thou is the audience, the Gentiles. So if some of the branches, so now he's comparing these blinded Israelites who fell. He's saying they now have, he's comparing them to branches that are broken off. So these blinded Israelites who fell are now representing breaking their branches being broken off of a tree. And thou, you Gentiles, being a wild olive tree. So the Gentiles are the wild olive tree, right? Not the blinded of Israel. They're cut off from the something, right? But they're definitely falling off from God's grace, right? They fell from God's grace. And as a result, Gentiles are being considered, right? Now, the blinded of Israel, the rest of Israel. I don't know how much more Israel are there because we're talking about the remnant and the blinded. We're talking about Israel, and from that Israel, that pie of Israel, we have a remnant portion of that pie, and then we have a blinded portion of that pie. We don't know. There's no other pie. There's no more pieces of pie left. Okay, then we're talking about the Gentiles, who is not piece of that pie of Israel at all. All right, so that those Gentiles are considered being a wild olive tree. We're grafted in among them, and with them partakers of the root and fatness of the olive tree. Okay, so the olive tree is a separate tree from the wild olive tree. And it's safe to say that the olive tree has branches, and those that remnant of Israel has a branch on that olive tree. The blinded or the blind of Israel who fell, they represent branches falling off of that original olive tree chosen by the Most High. Okay, good go. So they were never part of the olive tree according to Paul's analogy of the wild olive tree. They were never, they were never part of that wild olive tree, the blind of Israel, the blinded of Israel. Okay, they were part of the original olive tree. Thank you. So I hope y'all following. Excuse you. Okay, you're welcome. Okay, so hope y'all follow. I thought about doing like a little chart. Boast not against the branches, but if thou boast, thou bearest not the root, but the root thee, but the root thee. Okay. He's talking to the Gentiles who's not part of that Israel pie. Okay. He's saying, you're coming in because the large part of this pie fell off. So you're coming in, right? But don't brag or boast against the pie or the slices of the pie that been uprooted. Okay. You're coming in, don't brag, because they still could come back in. You're only coming in to provoke them to jealousy. Well, that's one main reason why you're coming in, is to provoke them to jealousy to come back in. So I still favor them and hold them dearly in my heart. But you guys, some of you guys have been doing good works too. So I'm going to consider you guys. But the worst thing you want to do is not provoke, but boast to the ones I kicked out, because that has nothing to do with you. I kicked them out for my good reasons. You don't have the right to brag and boast and show them up. But he's speaking to Gentiles. All right. He's not speaking to the ones who has fallen for God's grace and been broken off. The branch has been broken off of the tree of Israel. That will say then the branches were broken off that I might be grafted in. Okay. So again, we're talking about the I, he's speaking for the Gentiles. So the Gentiles will say, those Israelites that were blinded, they were broken off of this tree of this olive tree, this tree of God, that I may be grafted in. I, the Gentiles. That's not part of that Israelite pie. Well, because of unbelief, they were broken off, and thou standest by faith. Be not high-minded, but fear. Okay, so now we have the Gentiles who stand by faith, and the ones who were broken off because of their unbelief. They didn't have faith, they had unbelief. Got it. So we got Gentiles who has faith, and we got Israelites with no faith. Okay, so now those Gentiles who are being broken off, they're called the natural branches. Why? Because let's read it first. For if God spared not the natural branches, take heed lest he also spare not thee. So we got unnatural branches, which are the Gentiles, and we got natural branches, which are the Israelites who were blinded from that pie, that Israel pie. Okay, so unnatural branches are naturally part of the wild olive tree. Natural branches are naturally part of the olive tree. That's not wild. Okay. Behold, therefore, the goodness and severity of God on them which fell, because they fell, those Israelites fell, but toward thee goodness. Okay, so behold, therefore, the goodness and severity of God on them which fell, severity, but toward thee goodness, if you Gentiles continue in his goodness, otherwise you will be cut off too. Okay, so God is not a respecter of persons. I'm cutting you guys off because of their lack of goodness, of their unbelief, and you have the faith, you have the belief. So you're coming in, you're being grafted in to this natural tree. You were not natural to it. This is why you're considered the wild olive tree. Okay, now But you will be cut off if you decided to take advantage of this beautiful opportunity. No different than them. Okay, so don't brag, because you could find yourself right along them. And they also, if they abide not still in unbelief, shall be grafted in, for God is able to graft them in again. So he's speaking back on the blinded folks, right? The blinded Israelites. That's naturally part of the natural olive tree, and they are called the natural branches. Because he's saying, don't brag, because if they change their unbelief to holy beliefs, right, faith, they can be grafted back in. So they're not, just because they fell, just because I cut them off, because I broke their branches, I broke those branches off right now, it doesn't mean that they can't be placed back into this natural Israel olive tree. Okay. So in other words, y'all both can be here together. So this is not a replacement theory. You both can be here together. For if thou wert cut off the olive tree, so for if thou wert cut out of the olive tree, which is wild by nature, and were grafted contrary to nature into a good olive tree. So now we got a good olive tree and a wild olive tree. Okay. So the wild olive tree, their nature is against the nature of the good olive tree. Okay. So if you were cut out of the olive tree, which is wild by nature, so if you're being cut, so the Gentiles, if you're being cut off of your natural roots, wild olive tree, and you're being grafted contrary to the nature into a good olive tree, because this good olive tree don't produce branches like the tree you come from. How much more shall these, which be the natural branches, be grafted into their own tree, own olive tree? I mean, that's ball game. That's ball game. These natural branches were never naturally wild, and they were never naturally part of a wild olive tree. So the message here is, if I can graft you Gentiles, if I could cut you out of this wild olive tree and insert you to a good olive tree, which is going against nature, that is seen as a difficult task. But cutting off natural branches and then placing them back in the natural olive tree, that system is much more easier than grafting wild olive branches into a natural or good olive tree.
Daddy,
Yes.
it's Dad's.
Yeah. Oh, we're here. Hold on 1 second. So that is. Thank you. Thank you. We got him. Okay, go that way. Go that way. Go that way. No, go lay down there. Go now. Go. Okay, so that is a clear reading. That's the context. All right. That's the context. That's 24. And that is the proper way to read and start a study, start an assessment and analysis of Romans 11 to determine who is being spoken about when he says you, them, their, Gentiles, natural branches, good olive tree, wild olive tree. Okay, that's crystal clear, in my opinion, right? Anybody with a decent understanding, decent comprehension will understand the same way. So now let's jump to this guy. Take on it.
Are be the lump is also holy, and if the root be holy, so are the branches. So that chosen lineage that comes from Abraham is holy by default, because they come from that first fruit of Abraham. They come from that root of Abraham. So them being the chosen branches of Abraham are holy by default. That's what Paul is saying right there, right? We'll keep going. And if some of the branches be broken off, and thou being a wild olive tree wert grafted in among them, and with them partakest of the root and the fatness of the olive tree in the promises of Abraham, boast not against the branches, but if thou boast, thou bearest not the root, but the root thee. What he's saying is, Abraham's promise is what bears his offspring, right? I'm going to go a little further because I know that there may still be some pushback. Oh, wait, no, I don't say that. It's saying that if you're a Christian believer, that you are grafted in and covered by the promises of Abraham. And with just this alone, I can understand that. But don't worry, I'm building to a point here. Let's go. Let's take a look at verse 17 again. And if some of the branches be broken off, and thou, being a wild olive tree, wert grafted in among them. So he's referring to his audience as a wild olive tree. A wild olive tree, right? Well, where do we see that? Let's go to Jeremiah 2:21. And it reads.
Okay, so that's what you don't do. And that's what I didn't do. When you read something and you want to analyze it and give commentary and give textual criticism, you must read it in its full context and then come back and maybe look at supportive passages, but you don't stop midway. You don't stop anyway and introduce another pretext out of context itself and then try to explain another text that you didn't fully keep reading in context. Like, this is just confusion. So what he's about to insert right now, there's no way to know if he's actually honest, right? There's no way to know. Because even his pretext right here, he's taken out of context. You don't even know if this is in his proper context. If he's representing this passage in his proper context, you don't know. So now we got to read Romans 11 in its entirety. And now we got to read Jeremiah 2 in its entirety just to see if he's using them both in the proper context and then to see if they actually mesh well. So he just all over the place right now. And this is not how you do research or textual criticism. This is not how you do it at all. But this is the chief way.
Yet I planted thee, Israel, a noble vine, holy, not holy in the sense of separate, but in this instance, holy in the sense of completely or totally, holy, a right seed. How then art thou turned into the degenerate plant of a strange vine unto me? So here, the prophet Jeremiah, speaking as a medium for God to the Israelites, is telling the Israelites that they've become a wild tree. I planted you a noble tree, a noble vine.
Okay, so let's look at it. Let's see if we see the word wild tree there. Okay, yea, I had planted thee a noble vine, holy and right seed. How then art thou turned into a degenerate plant of a strange vine unto me? Where does it say a wild anything? Okay, so I clearly read Romans 11 in its context. Whether Israel go astray or do the words of the Most High, they are still natural branches and they're still part of the natural or the good vine, the good olive tree. Okay, it doesn't matter how much evil they do, they're still natural to God's environment. Okay, Gentiles are not natural. I'm talking about ethnic Gentiles. They're not natural to God's ways. So if God extended his word or any grace or anything to them, that's not natural. It was it was never naturally for them. Okay. So you can't ever call Israel wild anything, because we read in Romans 11, the wild represented unnatural to what God sees fit as natural. Okay, so even those Israelites who were blinded and cut off, they were not called wild. They were still called natural branches because they're natural to the tree. And the example Apostle Paul made was, even though they're cut off, grafting them back into this natural tree is easy. It's not a big thing because they're natural to it. But grafting you wild branches into this good olive tree, it takes much more work because you're not natural to it. So even though those Israelites had unbelief and they did wicked things, they're still natural branches. Nothing makes them unnatural. Okay? So now reading Jeremiah 2:21, this is speaking about Israel as a whole. Okay, he's saying he planted Israel a noble vine, right? And they're supposed to do right, but they didn't. They turned to a degenerate plant of strange vine unto me. Okay. Exactly what it says. So let's just look at Jeremiah 2:21. Let's just go there. Actually, we're already here. All right, you know what we're gonna do here? Let's go. Let's go different Bibles. So what verse was that? 21. It's gonna be easier. A little easier to follow. Okay, so new NIV. I have planted you like a choice vine of sound and reliable stock. How then did you turn against me into a corrupt wild vine? Okay, now that's all of them. That's everybody. This is not a comparison between two trees like Romans 11. So here, a corrupt wild vine. There you go again. So how did all of Israel turn into a corrupt, degenerate wild vine? All right. I had planted you like a choice vine. Okay. How could you turn yourself? Where we going? Stop it. How could you turn yourself before me into a rotten wild vine, a strange vine unto me into a degenerate plant of an alien vine? So these are examples that he's given Israel. Israel did wicked things, and all of a sudden they became like a Gentile, basically. So, okay, but they're still Israel. So he still acknowledged them as Israel. He's not acknowledging them as Gentiles at all. So that's the thing. So Israel can behave like Gentiles. They can behave like foolish people, like a foolish nation. But they'll still be Israel. They'll be Israel behaving like a foolish nation. Right? So they're still Israel. So they won't be called Gentiles. So all the wickedness they have done from their beginnings all the way till Paul's time, they in their wickedness, they still have been regarded as Israel, right? Not a Gentile. So even though God is acknowledging them as a wild vine, not a wild tree, not a wild olive tree, a wild vine, okay, fine. There's still Israel behaving like this, right? So the whole, by the way, the whole tree is so all of Israel is being is being acknowledged as a wild vine. But this is one tree. Where's the other tree? So remember, Romans 11 talks about two trees. So, but this is all of Israel. All of Israel is being seen as a wild vine. Where's the other tree to make a comparison to? Okay, it's not there. Not there. All right, so I can see where he's going with this. He's not absolutely crazy. So I can get where he's trying to do, which is okay. But he still got to explain the two trees. One is natural, one is unnatural. The two trees in Romans 11. Nothing about this was this tree always unnatural. All right. This tree was natural. This was Israel. And their wicked ways had made God view them as a wild vine. Not that they actually were, but their actions made God view them as that. Right. This is, again, when you take stuff out of context. So it's good to ask the question, well, what about Jeremiah 2:21? When God said Israel was a wild vine. You're like, well, let's talk about that. And what did he do to it? Okay, what did he do to that wild vine? So again, it's important that you don't take something like this out of context and just place it there and just paste it there. Say, what about this? It's like, well, we got to keep reading. So when you get to Romans 11, you'll see what God did to this wild vine. Let's see. All right. Let's finish the story out. Let's finish the story out. How did this play out? Yeah, because we know how Romans 11 played out. Okay. The Lord God gave another message to Jeremiah. He said, remind the people of Judah and Jerusalem, so this is everybody, about the terms of my covenant with them. Say to them, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Cursed is anyone who does not obey the terms of my covenant. For I said to your ancestors when I brought them out of Israel. Not Israel, sorry. I'm trying to read that down. All right. Blah, 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 blah. For I said unto your ancestors when I brought them out of the iron-smelling furnace of Egypt, if you obey me and do whatever I command you, you will then be my people, and I will be your God. I said this so I can keep my promise to your ancestors to give you a land flowing with milk and honey, the land you live in today. So this is contingent based upon the covenant. Then I replied, Amen, Lord, may it be so. Then the Lord said, broadcast this message in the streets of Jerusalem, go from town to town throughout the land and say, remember the ancient covenant and do everything it requires. For I solemnly warned your ancestors when I brought them out of Egypt, obey me. I have repeated this warning over and over till this day, but your ancestors did not listen or even pay attention. Instead, they stubbornly followed their own evil desires. And because they refused to obey, I brought upon them all the curses described in this covenant. Again, the Lord spoke to me and said, I have discovered a conspiracy against me among the people of Judah and Jerusalem, all of Israel. They have returned to the sins of their ancestors. They have refused to listen to me and are worshiping other gods. Israel and Judah have both broken the covenant I made with their ancestors. Therefore, this is what the Lord says. I'm going to bring calamity. I'm going to bring calamity upon them, and they will not escape. Though they beg for mercy, I will not listen to their cries. Then the people of Judah and Jerusalem will pray to their idols and burn incense before them, but the idols will not save them when disaster strikes. Look now, people of Judah, you have as many gods as you have towns. You have as many altars of shame, altars for burning incense to your god Baal, but Baal as there are streets in Jerusalem. Right? Pray no more for these people, Jeremiah. Do not weep or pray for them, for I will not listen to them when they cry out to me in distress. What right do my beloved people have to come to my temple when they have done so many immoral things? So this is all of Israel he displeased with. So yeah, they have become, in God's eyes, a wild vine, not olive tree, vine. And their vows and sacrifices prevent their destruction. They actually rejoice in doing evil. I, the Lord, once called them a thriving olive tree. Okay, here we go. I, the Lord, once called them a thriving olive tree, beautiful to see and full of good fruit. But now I have sent the fury of their enemies to burn them with fire, leaving them charred and broken. Right? So now we're talking about an olive tree, not a good vine, an olive tree. So I once called them a thriving olive tree. So if they're not thriving, they're just a non-thriving olive tree, but they're not a wild olive tree. Okay, watch this. That's why we gotta keep reading. We're not do that. No, we don't do that. We do proper textual criticism over here. I, the Lord of heavens, armies, who planted this olive tree, have ordered it destroyed, for the people of Israel and Judah have done evil, arousing my anger by burning incense to Baal. So this olive tree, it ain't wild. Even though they're wild, it's still an olive tree by name. It's not a wild olive tree. Then the Lord told me about the plots my enemies were making against me. I was like a lamb being led to the slaughter. I had no idea that they were planning to kill me. Let's destroy this man and all his words. They said, let's cut him down so his name will be forgotten forever. Okay, let's go down. Okay, boom. O Lord of heaven's armies, you make righteous judgments and you examine the deepest thoughts and secrets. Let me see your vengeance against them, for I have committed my cause to you. Yes. Wait, God bless you. Go lay down. Lay down. Bless you. Okay. This is what the Lord says about the men of Anathoth who wanted me dead. They had said, we will kill you if you do not stop prophesying in the Lord's name. So this is what the Lord of heaven's army says about them. I will punish them. The young men will die in battle, and their boys and girls will starve to death. Not one of these plotters from Anathoth will survive, for I will bring disaster upon them when their time of punishment comes. Okay, so there you go. So they were still called the olive tree. Okay, so we're not going to play with words and no. He said, wow, he said vine, 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 vine. Well, Romans 11 talks about an olive tree and a wild olive tree, not a wild vine. That's unnatural. All right. So Jeremiah 2, God was speaking about natural Israelites, ethnic Israelites, and he was saying, you have become a wild vine because of your wicked ways. But as we keep reading, even they're still wicked. They're still wicked, but they're regarded as what? An olive tree, a natural, good olive tree. They're not regarded as a wild olive tree. All right. So, point made.
Divine unto me. So here, the prophet Jeremiah, speaking as a medium for God to the Israelites, is telling the Israelites that they've become a wild tree. I planted you a noble tree, a noble vine, but you be.
Okay, bro. So he keep mixing up trees and vines. So let's do this. I got to do it. I got to be petty. I don't like when people be using interchanging words that's not interchangeable. A tree is a plant with a single sturdy trunk that grows upright and reaches a significant height, while a vine is a plant with a trailing stem that requires support to climb, usually by wrapping around other structures or using tendrils to cling on. Essentially, a tree stands independently, while a vine needs something to climb on to grow upwards. Okay, right. So they are a wild vine that's dependent, that needs support. They need to latch onto something. So they're a wild that. They're not a wild tree that's independent of those things that a vine is dependent on. So you'll see vines wrapped around buildings and also trees, by the way. Wrapped about all type of sort, but a tree can stand alone. So as you can see, standing alone, Israel is considered an olive tree. All right. An olive tree and a vine, they're not interchangeable nouns like he's trying to make them. Okay. So this is what you got to do in order to lie, to make your point. You got to lie and use words that's not interchangeable, but you use them interchangeably.
God, the prophet Jeremiah, speaking as a medium for God to the Israelites, is telling the Israelites that they've become a wild tree. I planted you a noble tree, a noble vine, but you become a degenerate plant. So when we see in,
okay, so you see that slick stuff, he tried to use vine and tree interchangeably, and we see that you cannot do that. There are two different things. The tree grows independently of any support or anything, and a vine doesn't. All right, a vine is 100% dependent upon something else. It can't stand upright on its own, and it does not. That's it. But you cannot use them interchangeably like he just tried.
verse 17, there's a reference to a wild olive tree. We can link that directly back to the prophecy about Israel becoming a degenerate plant. Keep in mind verse 16 that talks about the offspring of Abraham being holy by default simply from being his offspring. Let's go back to Jeremiah now. And let's see how and what God meant by Israel became a degenerate plant. Verse 23. How canst thou say, I am not polluted? I have not gone after Baalim or idols. See thy way in the valley. Know that thou hast done. Thou art a swift dromedary traversing her ways. You've went into idolatry. You have went into idolatry, Israel. That's how you became a degenerate plant. To further prove that, we skip into verse 25 now. Withhold thy foot from being unshod and thy throat from thirst, but thou saidest, there is no hope. No, for I have loved strangers, and after them will I go. So following strangers into their idolatry is how Israel became a degenerate plant, or the wild olive tree that Paul is referring to. To further prove that that's what Paul's talking about, let's take a look at another epistle where he references this. This is 1 Corinthians 12:2. Ye know that ye were Gentiles, carried away unto these dumb idols, even as ye were led.
Okay, so now again, this is why it's really bad to use pretext for something else, for a different different text, is because once you bring up 1 Corinthians 12:2, he's going to say that this is speaking about Israelites or Israel. I'm going to say this is actually speaking about Gentiles. So when he says, you know that ye were Gentiles, I'm saying he's actually talking to Gentiles who are no longer Gentiles, who left that. Okay, to be a Gentile means you're not embracing God, the Most High. That means you don't have faith. You have disbelief, and you are still believing that there's outside entities that can help you with your needs and your necessities outside of the Most High. Okay, once you become a believer in the Most High, you're realizing, and you're acknowledging and admitting that only the Most High can help you out of tough times, things that seem like they're, or just get you where you need to be. Once you think something outside the Most High can do that, you're a Gentile. But when you're admitting the Most High controls everything and nothing is done without him, and only through him, salvation and peace and tranquility, all these great things can come by, riches, food, that's when you have a belief, and you believe in the Son, obviously. But that's what makes you a non-Gentile. So Paul obviously is dealing with these Gentiles, ethnic Gentiles, and he's saying, remember, you were Gentiles carried away unto dumb idols, because that's what Gentiles do. So the reason why Israel was worshiping Gentiles, I'm sorry, even when Israel was worshiping idols, whose idols were they? They're Gentiles' idols. And why were they doing that? They were immolating Gentiles. That was a Gentile thing, to worship idols. And when Israel goes away from the Most High, they would immolate Gentiles and do the practices of a Gentile. Okay, so once a Gentile, somebody who's not chosen by God originally, that's all a Gentile is, the other nations, because there's only one real nation that God acknowledges, and that's Israel. So the other nations don't even have a name like that. It's not respected to the Most High. They're just called other nations or Gentiles or heathens. Okay, so anyway, but once those heathen nations, once those or individuals, once those heathen individuals or those Gentile individuals, once they embrace the Most High for who he is and praise and worship him and acknowledge and worship his son, or praise his son, lift up his son, they are no longer Gentiles. So Gentile is an action, it's a behavior, but you can leave that behavior in action, as Romans 11 just said. Your faith can get you out of the mind state of becoming a Gentile. So Paul is speaking to believing. So in short, Paul is speaking to believing former Gentiles, okay, or believing Gentiles, which makes them no longer Gentiles. So he's saying, you know that ye were Gentiles carried away unto dumb idols, even as ye were led, right? He's speaking to actual ethnic people who were called Gentiles because of their behavior and mindsets. And now they're no longer that. He just reminded them. So what Grla is doing here is he'll say it, and a lot of crazy people, they want to act like the Most High is speaking to Israelites, which can be easily debunked. Okay, so he's not speaking to Israelites here, but this is Grla's angle.
This First Corinthians prove that that's what Paul's talking about. Let's take a look at another
You have
epistle
to lie in order to like be correct with this crazy doctrine.
where he references this. This is 1 Corinthians 12:2. Ye know that ye were Gentiles, carried away unto these dumb idols, even as ye were led. So he tells Israel, you love strangers, and after them you went. That made you a wild olive tree or a degenerate plant.
No. He never called them a wild olive tree. So that's something you got to just prove. That he looked them as a degenerate plant, right? Never a wild olive tree. The plant is independent of things. The tree isn't. Okay. They are different things in nature. Okay. They're literally different things. But he never called them a wild olive tree. And he needs to slip that in there to be right when he's wrong. He just can't say what the Bible says. He just can't do it. Now, I can say, yeah, the Most High looked at them as a wild, corrupt, degenerate vine. So I can say that with my chest out. But what I'm not going to do is say a wild, degenerate, corrupt olive tree. That's not what he said. And I showed you later on in Romans 11, in Jeremiah 11, he still called Israel. They're still wicked. They're still degenerate. They're still wicked. They still are degenerates, and they're still corrupt. But he called them an olive tree. He never called them a wild olive tree. Even in their corruption, their wicked ways, their degeneracy, he still called them an olive tree without the wild part. All right. So good try, Grla Hebrew, but we are experienced over here, and it's not going to work.
Because you followed the idol of Israel way unto these dumb idols, even as ye were led. So he tells Israel, you love strangers, and after them you went. That made you a wild olive tree or a degenerate plant.
Because they love what? Anyway.
Because you followed the idols or Baalim of the nations. Same thing iterated in Jeremiah 2, 21, 23, and 25.
It didn't say that. And this is why he can't read the book straight up and down like I did. So I read Jeremiah up and down. I read chapter 11 up and down. He can't do that. He got to stop, grab something out of context, bring it over here, and misapply it. You know, all this, that's what Pharaoh magicians did.
Is there mirrored in Romans 11, 16, 17, 18, and 1 Corinthians 12:2. Very simple, right? You became wild through idolatry, through being led and following the ways of other nations. So you're being brought back into this through repentance, through a door being opened to you through the shedding of the blood of who you call Christ, to be redeemed and reconciled back to the nation that you rightfully belong to. Or
we didn't read any of that in Romans 11. His conclusion, his summation, we read none of that.
Or back to the root, Abraham. Simple. To further,
what they do though, they don't want to talk about Romans 11 or the passage in question. They want to waste time arguing Jeremiah 2, Jeremiah 11, what was the other one? 1 Corinthians 12. They want to waste time arguing those things. They don't want to spend time arguing Romans 11. So you got to tell them, hey, I'll come back to that. Okay, so you went here, Jeremiah 2, 21. I'll come back to that. Oh, 1 Corinthians 12, I'll come back to that. Let's just finish up on Romans 11, and then we'll talk about the other passages you brought out, because they have their own context, they have their own story, and we'll deal with those separately. We're not going to mix and mingle.
Further prove that, though, let's just go back to Romans 11 and further examine what the conclusion of Romans 11 is here in the 25th verse. It's Romans.
Conclusion. You never read it. Like, how you drawing a conclusion? You read like a total of 4 passages in Romans 11, and now you're giving a conclusion? That's wild. I read the whole thing, or most of it. That's wild. I read what apply. I read from verse 1 to like what, verse 26?
Romans 11:25, and it reads, "For I would not, brethren, that you should be ignorant of this mystery, lest ye should be wise in your own conceits." This is important because he's rebuking. He's saying, listen, don't be wise in your own conceits. I'm going to explain what this whole
Talking to you literally.
olive tree thing means here, because I can understand how maybe somebody can get confused or take this the wrong way, that I'm talking about something that I'm not talking about. He wouldn't have said that if
Not the mystery. The mystery isn't, I'm talking in plain language and you guys might understand it totally wrong. So the mystery is, I'm not saying it the way you think I'm saying it. I'm actually saying it the way I'm saying it. That ain't the mystery. The mystery is that this ethnic Gentiles being grafted into the tree of Israel, the tree of God, the olive tree, the good olive tree, was never known to Israel. That's the mystery. It's not what he's saying. It's confusing. The confusion is not, a ball of confusion isn't the mystery. The mystery is the ethnic Gentiles being grafted into the ethnic Israelite tree.
if he didn't understand that this could be misconstrued, and that's typically how this verse is taken. This is
So he's not going to understand it. A prophet of God who's been afforded revelation. He doesn't know that, but you know it. An ex-drug dealer, ex-gamer, ex-convicted, but still high school dropout. You know that stuff, but okay.
a cornerstone of Christian doctrine and replacement theology. But as we can see here, he's making it clear, don't be ignorant of this mystery. This is a mystery, I'm telling you, right? But don't be ignorant of what it means. Don't be wise in your own conceit. Blindness in part has happened to Israel, meaning the Israelites that were in Judea, they couldn't see what was right in front of them, which was that Yahushua was the Messiah, that the time was coming. That's who the person that we were supposed to follow, right? They didn't understand the truth, right? It happened to them until the fullness of the Gentiles become in. That's important. And Captain Zariak references the fullness of the Gentiles in this prophecy. I'm going to go into it here now, right? And again, I encourage everybody, watch this in its totality. Is good. I'm just highlighting certain key points and reacting to them specifically. Genesis 48:19. And his father refused and said,
no, we're not going to go to somewhere else. Dude, finish up in Romans 11. Okay, so we're not going to do that. We're not going to jump around.
To this Bible, for example. And this literally, Gentile, but Gentile is a neutral word which simply means nation, and in certain contexts it takes on certain meanings, right?
No. Brother, listen, it's real clear. Okay, Gentile are nations that are typically non-Israel. So if the word Gentile means nation and is applied to Israel, it's because we already know Israel is a nation. So it just, it's at that point, it just means nation, like he said, just nation, just Israelite nation. All right. But to misappropriate the word Gentile as though it can mean Israelites, that's wrong. Okay, because then you're gonna have an issue. When we keep reading Gentile in the Bible, we got to keep asking you, hey, is Israel included? And you got to keep answering all these questions. Cool. So now when do we know if Gentiles Israel or Gentile is Gentiles? And you'll say context. Exactly. It comes back to context, and that's where it's going to stay. All right. So it's easy to differentiate when you see the word Gentile, and believe me, 90.9 times it's going to be talking about non-Israelites.
Right? It could mean non-Israelite nation, but Israel is called a nation. Judea.
So let's. So I drunk all that. I dropped the cup, but luckily it's not in there. All right. So look, we in 48. Yeah, I got it. I cleaned it up. So we in Genesis 48. Everywhere but Romans.
Of this.
We read 4 passages, and this is what they do. Normally, when it's a passage, a book, chapter, verse in question, normally they don't read it. They like to read other books, passages, and verses that they believe are supporting their doctrine, but they never really read the passage, book, verses in question. And as you can see, he's reading other Bible books and passages, but he read about 3-4 verses from Romans 11. He didn't do what I did. He didn't read the whole thing in context where it clearly points out who is who. Okay.
Parable, Romans 11. Let me go here to verse 28. Watch this. Very interesting. As concerning the gospel, they are enemies, talking about the Jews who are coming against the gospel of Christ. But watch this. For your sakes, but as touching the election of God, what does it say? They are beloved for the Father's sake. Meaning, because they are the literal physical descendants of Abraham, God still loves them even though they are enemies to the gospel. For our sake, they come against us for teaching the truth. Yet and still, the Most High still loves them because of the promises he made to Abraham, and they are of his chosen lineage. That proves, hands down, this can only be talking about physical Israelites. Because their whole concept is, well, if a non-Israelite becomes a believer, they're grafted into Israel. But he's saying here, God loves these people even though they're enemies to the gospel. Y'all will say that people are not spiritual Israelites even if they're physical Israelites that don't believe in Christ, but God's saying he still loves them even though they're enemies to the gospel. That's because there's only one group of people he ever expressed love for, the Israelites. And that love is unconditional, it can't be broken. So that's what Paul is talking about here in Romans 11. Taking Israelites who went degenerate through following other nations and going into idolatry. And
okay, now Paul ain't say nothing about none of that stuff. All right. And this is what happens when you are listening to cult leaders and you're interested in cults organizations. Paul said nothing of the likes. Paul said what he said. I read what he said, and the summation was not what you're concluding, dude. You're totally wrong, right? This is why you won't talk to anybody on this topic. If you were clearly right, you would do what most people do. You would go and fight the good fight. You would crush as much people you can that's delivering a false doctrine in your mind. But instead, we're reaching out to you, and you are fleeing. You're fleeing. The wicked flee when no man pursueth. You're fleeing. You're fleeing from battling, from the battle of mind. We want to talk to you based on your assessment of Romans 11. You don't talk to anybody, you run. All right? You flee. So you guys determine who had the exegesis, who had the eisegesis on Romans 11. All right? To me, this is clear cut.